Good afternoon, everyone. This is Joanne Ng Hartman, Senior Director of International Enrollment Management, International Student Services at NAFSA. We're pleased to host this virtual international education town hall. We recognize the need for the international education community to come together and move forward to support international students and scholars. As a reminder, this virtual town hall is being recorded and will be made available for others who are not able to join us today. So we'll continue to collect questions to help us move forward and formulate future virtual events so that we can help address the needs of the international education community. For today's presentation and town hall, please click on the text bubble that is located in the gray bar on your screen, and you can then type in the chat box. We'll try to get as many of your questions as possible at the end of this presentation, and I ask that you please mute all your phones. Now I'll ask our two presenters to introduce themselves. Ravi?
Thank you, Joanne, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this town hall meeting. My name is Ravi Shankar. I'm the director of the international office at Northwestern University during the daytime, and my nighttime job is with NAFSA as the vice president for professional development and engagement.
And my name is Sam Brown, and I am the director for the International Student and Scholar Services Office at Brigham Young University. And for NAFSA, I am the chair-elect for the International Student and Scholar Services Knowledge Community. Happy to be here. So we're going to start off today by talking a little bit about the things that you've listed on your screen there. So we've heard from many of you regarding how to respond to the international student queries and concerns that have come up in the last couple of weeks. So this is the first in a series of town hall dialogues that NAFSA will host to help provide resources and best practices for you as you support and engage your students and your scholars on campus. So you can see on today's agenda, we will address NAFSA's continued commitment to international education. We're going to focus on resources and best practices, and we hope to leave ample time at the end to share some of those models and practices from across the country, and we'll let you know how to do that when that time comes. So let's go ahead and start with the NAFSA commitment. And Robbie, do you want to jump in there? And please advance the slide, Rita.
Thank you, Sam. So as many of you know, anytime there's a big change like this with a new administration, it can take a while to figure out what will happen, what this really means, and what the impact is going to be. Because as of right now, we're sort of in this uncertain landscape, and so one of the things that we sort of have to keep in mind, I think, really is to avoid any kind of speculation because it is so early, at this point. So there are a lot of things we don't know than we do know, and I think one of the things that NAFSA, can promise is that we will stand by the values, that has really made NAFSA, strong, and its core strength, and which is valuing diversity and the power of education to build bridges. And Rita, and as you'll see on the screen, and in front of you, our main four component commitment, that NAFSA has really stated in terms of the work that we do. So there could be a tendency, I think, for amongst us saying that this is fight or flight, and I think one of the things that I think we really have to do is to really stand firm and be committed to staying in and fight the good fight. And I think there are a lot of different ways that you can do this. Rita, if you can forward to the next slide, please. In terms of advocacy, and one of the avenues really is connecting our world. So as you see, it's easy to get involved, and I think getting involved is probably more important than any time, I think, in our professional lives thus far. And you can sign up for action alerts through Connecting Our World. And I think the link is provided on the site, which is www.connectingourworld.org, which is NAFSA's primary advocacy site. then you'll get an email updates and action alerts when legislation is moving, and we need people to make phone calls or send email to the members of Congress. And I think I can really, cannot, I think, emphasize enough how important it is now to really get involved. And you'll see some of these commitments. Marlene Johnson just wrote a letter to, I think, all the IU professionals. I think is dated November 9th, where she sort of re-emphasizes how IE is critical to the nation, and how NAFTA plays an important part in advocating for policies that really create a common ground among diverse options. So I think the key emphasis really is advocacy. And Rita, if you go to the next slide, and you'll see. Another way to really get involved is NAFSA's Advocacy Day, which is scheduled for March 13th to the 14th in 2007, for next year. And I don't have to really tell anyone how important, these days are now, particularly after the inauguration. And after a day of training and strategizing, you will head to Capitol Hill, with all the tools you need to educate Congress on the value of international education and NAFSA's policy priorities. We really need to channel our energy into action, and I think that is the key message here, is that channeling our energy into action. But I think in the next few slides, I think what we're really going to be touching upon rather briefly is about the statutes and regulations. And it's probably, I would sort of hazard a guess here, is that it's not so much, I think, to educate, all of you on the statutes and regulations, but I think it may be an important piece of information that you may need to pass on to your colleagues at your institutions, as well as the students, in terms of how do these laws and these statutes and these regulations come about. Particularly because it is too early to tell how President-elect Trump's policy will impact international education students, and as you know, campaign rhetoric and actual policy are two very different things. So I think at this point, I think we just have to keep in mind that all current policies and regulations are in effect. And I think that is the message that I think we need to continue to tell our students, that is the critical message, is that all current policies and practices and guidelines and regulations are in effect. But it might be helpful, Rita, if you go to the next slide, to look at this graphic, and which sort of shows how policies, regulations, and statutes must ultimately conform to the Constitution. So if you take a closer look, Congress must create statutes or laws, and the creation of regulations is generally left to the agencies, and statutes must conform to the Constitution, and regulations must conform to the statutes they implement. So the Administrative Procedures Act, I think, specifies the process that agencies follow in creating regulations, and they're required to publish regulations in the Federal Register for public comment. And you can follow these on the NAFTA website and the Advisor's Manual newsfeed to learn about the publications of any new rules planned to contribute, and you can also plan to contribute, I think, via ISUNet, to NAFSA's comment letters, and plan to submit your own comment letters. And once again, to emphasize how I think critically important it is, I think, for you, all of us, to be engaged in this. So if you go to the next slide, if you go on further, and to really look at the processes, and the President may issue executive orders, which essentially have the force of law, but they must also conform to the Constitution and are subject to judicial review. So again, I would urge you to follow the NAFSA website and the Advisor's Manual newsfeed for information about executive orders that may impact international students and scholar programs. And remember also that NAFSA will continue engagement with all the agencies that regulate international students and scholars' processes. And I think this might be an important piece of information, I think, to share, with our students and scholars as well, to kind of remove the myth of how laws and regulations come into being, and and how what part Congress and other federal agencies play a role, I think, in the formation and the formulation and the implementations of these laws and regulations. So if you, to continue, so Sam, will you take us through the resources and best practices?
You bet. Thank you, Ravi.
Yeah.
So as you can see, we've divided this section into the where, the what, the who, and the how aspects of the resources and best practices. So we're going to go ahead and start with the where. Rita, if you'll advance to the next slide. So we realize some of this is very general and even obvious, but we think there's value in the dialogue. And so the first place to start, we believe, is that it's important to remember that first and foremost, we should be a safe place for our students to come and talk, for them to share apprehensions and feelings, and to know that we'll listen to them, not judge or devalue those feelings. And there are a lot of ways to encourage them to do this. I think some of the most simple and sometimes powerful ways can be in the communication that we issue to them to invite them into our offices. And it's been great in the last week and a half or so, pardon me, we've seen a lot of wonderful examples of across the country offices and leaders who have made those invitations for their students, and of the administrations who have helped those students to feel like they're valued and cared for. And that is first and foremost the best thing that we can do, so that they know where they can go and that they can feel safe in doing so. Now, part of that safety comes from what happens when they do come in for that visit. So along with that, and getting to the what aspect, there is great value in being prepared for those visits. So we recommend having talking points in anticipation of what is shared and questions that are asked. We recommend that you know your resources well, both on campus and also in the community, to help guide students in these difficult situations. And we encourage you to be ready to explain processes, very similar to what Ravi just did with the statuses and the regulations. And right now, I think with the timing of changes, as students start to panic and think this is going to happen immediately and I'm going to be affected immediately without time to prepare for it, there's value in anticipating those types of questions, and many of you have already received them, we know, so that students can become familiar with those procedures and the required updates and changes with regulations and the statutes. Now, one quick thing to mention with this as well is that most people who are frustrated or who have deep concerns for their own personal situations don't just want to be told that it's going to be okay and not to worry about it. They want to be heard, and they want to know that it's okay to feel the way that they feel and to have that fear, and that you value them and that you'll work with them to help navigate the challenging times. Even if there's uncertainty with us as a professional entity, there's value in us being able to say that we'll be there with them to help navigate it. However you can help them feel safe and validated is wonderful, but we recommend thinking it through and being prepared as you anticipate these conversations and visits. And there's some great resources which we'll share in just a minute here to help with that preparation. Okay, next slide, Rita. So along with knowing the resources, we encourage you to help convene the appropriate stakeholders at your institution and to engage them in the conversations and the planning processes that you'll have. So some of these stakeholders may include, but are certainly not limited to, your counseling centers and your health centers, your dean of students, your university police, the Equity and Diversity Office, academic departments, student associations, faculty, and there are likely many, many more. That we need to remember that concern for our students spans across the entire institution, and we recommend making this as inclusive a process at your institution as possible. And this also shows, I think, the more people we gather together to help spread this message that we value them helps our students to feel that safety and that value from the institution. It's not just from your office, but from the others as well. So on a more somber note, we hope that incidents of harassment and disparagement or anything worse don't happen, but we know that they do. And I think in the last couple of weeks, the media has been full of lots of examples of what has happened across campuses in our country. So if or when these incidents happen, we also need to have a plan in place for how to handle them and how to report them. And we need to be able to share that with the students. I think most, if not all, institutions likely already have these plans, but it's wise to review them often, and especially right now. So just as some general guidelines, obviously, would be to help students, again, feel safe in reporting those incidents, to know that they'll be protected and safe when they report them to you, to help them know how to best report them, what mechanisms might be in place in your institution. Maybe to offer to be with them as they report if they need that additional support, and to follow up with them after it's done to make sure that they're doing okay and felt like they were able to share what they needed to share. Again, we hope that this doesn't happen, but we understand that it does, and unfortunately, we should be one of those places that can help when an incident does occur.
Mm-hmm. And Sam, if I can jump in, I think I just wanted to kind of reiterate the importance of the collaboration across your institutions is very critical. We as officers, we just can't be the source of the only information for these students, and I think the more officers you get involved, I think the better you are in terms of really getting the message out, and I think really creating a support mechanism for these students.
Absolutely. Thank you, Robbie. And that's so needed right now, I think, for the students who are minorities on campus and need to feel cared about and loved. So thank you. Mm-hmm. Okay, next slide, Rita. Back slide. You'd already done it. So along with knowing the resources, we also, keep going. Forward slide. Sorry about that, Rita. We also wanted to kind of, with that in mind, share some of the good practices and the things that we've seen across the nation in the last couple of weeks that have come in. So first and foremost, we've seen a lot of messaging from a lot of higher level entities on the institutions where you serve. So we encourage you to engage your presidents and your chancellors and those at the top to show that support. So along with what Ravi said, I think that there's even more value when it comes from the top. And as you can show your commitment to diversity and inclusion through messaging, that's extremely helpful. One example, so if you look at the top right-hand corner, Northwestern, at Ravi's institution, the Counseling Center shared a flyer on coping with election stress that was disseminated across campus, which not only helps to share the information, but helps students, I think, feel like that's a place they can go if they need to talk to somebody on more of a clinical level. Mm-hmm. We've had some great examples. The current chair for KISS, Elizabeth Matthews from Michigan State University, has shared quite a few things that they've done with working with the Office of Equity to create a video for international students on how to report incidents and the importance of reporting those incidents. They also reached out to a local Islamic center near campus, and I think this one is crucial. As I mentioned, the more we can include the community, the broader community outside of just our campus, the more value it is as well. And especially for those populations that at this point might be feeling the most vulnerable and towards whom we've seen some of the worst incidences across the country of discrimination and hate crimes and things. The more we can reach out to the community to help with that, the better it is. So at MSU, they also had a staff member present after there were rumors of an anti-Muslim protest that circulated. And so the presence of that office was there as well. In the middle of this slide, you'll see the Healing Spaces event that they hosted, which was a debate-free space that was meant to help debrief some of the issues and the concerns that had come up. So some wonderful examples. On the bottom right-hand side, the MIT president sent out an email to the community and also mentioned that they had done an activity where students had wrapped columns of white paper around some of the columns on their campus and invited people to come and write and share their hopes and their fears on those white pieces of paper. Tulane University's Office of International Students and Scholars is hosting a talk that they titled, "Everything You Always Wanted to Know About the Election But Were Afraid to Ask." And it was a collaboration between the Political Science Department and the Office of International Student Services. And they also had another event that they titled "The Stress of Uncertainty, Navigating the Care of Self and Others," and that led to an opportunity for them to discuss and learn to deal with the difficult times in a productive way. Another one that's not listed on there, or at the top left, it shows Healthline. They put up the 2016 winners for the best anxiety applications that you can get, the apps on your phones and your smart devices, which is a great thing to point students towards, especially if they're feeling that anxiety. Obviously, if it gets to a point where a simple app is not going to help, we need to help push them towards those counseling, those psychological services that they might need as well. Just this morning we received a great handout from Penn State that had 6 key points to remember about immigration law and policy following the election, and we've seen many, many other wonderful things from institutions across the nation. In just a little bit here, we're going to give an opportunity for those of you who are participating to also share best practices and examples that you've done on your campus as well. But before we do that, if I can just mention some of the additional NAFSA resources that you might find useful. And Rita, if you'll advance to the next slide, please. So NAFSA has the comprehensive resource on crisis management. And so some of the ideas and actions within the crisis management resource that they've got will be applicable to your campus. So we wanted to remind you about this and that it's available so you can choose to make sure choose what makes sense to your institution's situation. And you can find those at the URL at the bottom right-hand side, www.nafsa.org/ISSS. We've also called out a specific article in the January-February issue of the International Educator titled, "Crisis Management is Easier When You Have a Plan in Place." And back issues of International Educator are available online. And then also as a reminder, the NAFSA e-learning seminars, which are listed on the bottom left-hand URL. And then NAFSA has created a website, and they'll keep it updated through this town hall page with a lot of those resources and the examples that I shared and others that have come in. And then one last resource, NAFSA also has created a folder in the ISTA network where stakeholders can upload and share their resources with the community, and we would encourage you to do so within that network so that practitioners in the field can also borrow the great things that you've done and hopefully use them on their campus as well. Okay, so at this point, Rita, if you'll advance to the next slide, I'd like to now open up the virtual town hall for others to share what they're doing on campus, and we hope that you'll be willing to do so, to give examples of how you're supporting your international students and scholars, and to ask questions as well. So before we jump into this, I'd like to set up just some expectations and hopes for this. Our hope is that this is a conversation that will be productive. We understand that this may be a challenging time as there are heightened emotions that have come and frustrations, and as you deal with students who have felt that fear and frustration, we understand that you may also have that as well. But as a reminder, this is not meant to be a forum to air grievances, but to focus on the productive way we can help students as they navigate this challenging time. And we believe that's a helpful approach not only for our students but for us, because we get to help model that professionalism as we meet with them in our individual and respective offices. So with that in mind, we invite you to share with us things that you're doing and also ask any questions that you have. There are 3 talking points you can see listed that we've put up to help guide that. So what are some talking points you have used? Which departments have you collaborated with? And what are some specific questions that you've heard from students and scholars on your campus? And as you can see, we'll be accepting those questions and comments through the chat box, and we welcome those at this time. So somebody did just ask about the Penn State handout, and we'll reach out and make sure that they're okay with us sharing that, and if they are, I think we can definitely add that to the website, the town hall website, and the folder that's being created. And again, along with anything else that anyone is willing to share with us on the ISTA network or in any other way, we'd love to make those available.
And Sam, there is, I think, Susan Reed from St. Mary's College of California they're hosting a special session with our diversity chair on campus, focusing on the post-election process in the U.S. So I think that's an excellent idea to really work with your diversity and inclusion offices, as well as I'm assuming that most of you are working with your general counsels. If you have an office general counsel, or if you don't, some of the attorneys that you work with outside of your campuses to really work and present some of these things.
Excellent. So somebody just asked about what network I keep referring to. The ISTA, the International Student Advising Network that is available through NAFSA, is where you'll be able to upload some of that information as well and share some of those great things. Christy, it looks like, asked about touching on the topic of sanctuary campuses for DACA and undocumented students. That's a great one. I just read an article yesterday that talked about across the nation a lot of the calls to make campuses a sanctuary that will not report in any way DACA or undocumented students. And that's a wonderful idea, but it comes with some legal challenges from what I read as well, because there are, if ICE does have a warrant or wants to get information, they can. So I think that's a debate and a question that still is going to keep going on and on, but is definitely on the radar as far as the protected status on a campus for those students.
Yeah, and I think, I just wanted to kind of reiterate how critical it is that all of you, and you all know this, but to work with your general counsel's office and, on this issue as well. And I think there were a couple of other, so Illinois State has been hosting a whole semester's international seminar series on U.S. presidential election from a global perspective. I think that's a great piece of, I think, programming.
That is.
Yeah.
Looks like a lot of good collaboration.
And I think Chatham has election debrief, I think, which is also very interesting. And one of the things that we did at Northwestern was exactly that, in terms of debriefing. And we used this, the gallery method of really taking in people's, how people were feeling and their concerns and fears. And we posted notes all across the wall, and it is quite an interesting compendium, in the spectrum of how people are feeling, from, Trump doesn't worry me, to, would Trump really declare war? And where, to which country. And I think this particular exercise, you can do it in small groups, really has helped to bring out, I think, really the sort of the deep-seated fears and concerns that I think students, have.
Yeah. So May Cooley asked about the URL to the article that I just mentioned. It was in InsideHigherEd.com, and it's an article called "Can a Campus Be a Sanctuary" by Elizabeth Redden, R-E-D-D-E-N. We'll put this on all the links and things on the town hall page as well. But again, I thought that was a great document talking about what is being called for on the campuses, and then also addressing some of the legal challenges that come with that.
And I think there was another great idea from Margaret Cohn, says, "You're welcome here" video featuring students and staff from campus. And I think that's also a good idea.
Absolutely.
Yeah. There was another question, I think, if, while people are still, sending in their thoughts, and I think one of the questions was, how NAFSA will not allow administration to normalize, the abuse of Muslim students, and I think this is, a public, we'll bring this to the attention of public policy, but I think if you go back to, I think even Marlene's letter, and I think the firm belief that it is against NAFSA values for any discrimination, and I would imagine that NAFSA will continue to stress that point. Yeah.
So two things that just popped up that I thought were really good too. Jackie Layton asked, students ask what should they be aware of if they want to protest or participate in protest. That's a great question, and I think a lot of that needs to be institution specific as far as any policies, but also letting them know that anything that heightens or escalates to something that could get them into trouble with the police could also be a serious issue for them. And those conversations are a wonderful thing to do as they approach to say, what is your hope with this? And here's some things to caution you as. And again, working with your general counsel and perhaps your student life areas and on your campuses for any specific policies with the protests and things. And then Janessa brought up, a lot of concerns about immediate changes. And going back to what, Ravi, you talked about, anything that does change is going to take quite a bit of time. Outside of perhaps some of that executive action that President-elect Trump will be able to change more quickly. If it's not an executive action, you're talking quite a bit of time between the legislative process and in some cases perhaps even years down the road. And I do think that is a good message to be able to share. Not that don't worry about it, but you'll have time and we'll figure this out as it goes, but it will not be immediate for most of these regulatory type.
Right, and I think the important point there is to really, I think, to avoid speculation as much as possible, and to, I think, sort of, and using, I think, the slides that we were talking about in terms of regulations and statutes, I think, as a way of educating us, I think everyone, and including our students and scholars. And related to that, there was a question from Roger Atkins about some of our F1 students hoping to pursue OPT and or H-1B expressed worries about the opportunities being closed down, advise about talking point. And I think, once again, I think it's really important to I think, really assert the fact that all current regulations are in effect until January 21, and that, we really don't, we can't really speculate as to what the policy is going to be. And as most of you know, Trump has really sort of, vacillated on his point of view of an H-1B. So on the issue of H-1B, so I think we really have no idea except to say, I think, to listen to them, and to say, we will, that you and your offices are the source of information that they should rely on, and not, I think, sort of fall prey to this, bludgeoning, fake news sources that are, that are going on, and that, that your offices will be the source of information, if and when, things do change, and also rely, once again, going back to NAFSA and NAFSA website and the advisor's manual. And the association is really working to be on top of this.
Yeah, and something like that, especially when it comes to things like H-1B, that's a congressional issue as much as anything that will take quite a bit of time if they do try to push anything, and who knows what will happen. And like you said, speculation can cause as much damage as anything. One of the things that we did on our campus is we have an immigration attorney who's a local immigration attorney who we've invited onto campus, not just to give a lecture to everybody, but she's willing to set up free one-on-one, 15 to 20-minute time slots with students who are concerned. And that's a luxury that we were fortunate to have, but that has been so helpful for our students who want to ask very specific questions that are often outside of the purview of the ISSS offices.
And one of the things that that we've done at Northwestern is that we have now created a committee that of all the stakeholders and constituencies that deal with international students and scholars, led by our Office of Strategic Initiatives, and the university has made a commitment that they will have attorneys present 2 days a week on campus for students to come and make appointments so that they can come and talk to the immigration attorneys, in addition to having several different sessions presented by attorneys. So there are a lot of different models that I think one can consider, but I think the important thing really is to say that you really have to really look at all the stakeholders on your campuses who sort of who are involved in this, and who policymakers and who can make the impact and be able to provide the services. I think that is more critical, I think, than ever.
Absolutely, that's a great point. So Matt brought up a great question about NAFSA creating educational tools and resources to provide information for students. And I think that this is part of that forum that hopefully can spark those types of tools from not just NAFSA but the community as well. There's some great flyers and handouts that I've personally seen from different places that if you're willing to share those, we would ask that you go and again upload those to that ISTA network, and we'll see if we can add those to the folder so that others have access as well.
And I think there was a question about have we been talking to parents, and I think one of the things that we've been doing is, once again, be very, very mindful of the fact that we really don't alarm anyone, because at this point, since there's so much uncertainty. But what we are reiterating to the parents is that all current regulations and guidelines and laws are in effect, and that travel over the winter break, will not be impacted, as long as, and to make sure that they have all the documents documents that they need, and they have a valid visa stamp in their passport. And I mean, we've been communicating to our parent Facebook pages.
Great.
Yeah.
So it seems like a lot of people have been asking about DACA students as well.
Yeah.
One thing just to mention at the end of this, Joanne's also going to remind us about another event that will touch on DACA students and go into the regulatory practice side of things. But I do think that's where, on our campus at least, we've seen a lot of real concern since DACA was an executive action by President Obama, that we don't know what will happen. We don't know whether or not President-elect Trump will end up moving to dismiss that. He's made comments that he will, but then he's also made comments talking about that his concern are for those that are the criminals and who have broken the law in more egregious types of things. And so for our side of it, that's a tough one on our campus, to be really honest. And we're doing all we can to try and make our office feel safe, and especially for the DACA and the undocumented students, that can be a tough thing too, because a lot of them hear that we'll report them to ICE, or that we by law have to do certain things if they come in and talk. Mm-hmm. And so we've reached out to try and say that's not the case, and we do not report that information to ICE if a DACA or an undocumented student comes in, and creating that safe space for them to come and talk, I think, is again crucial. But at this point, that's where a lot of the speculation really can run rampant, because we just don't know what's going to happen on the executive action side of things. Mm-hmm. And there was a great point that was brought up with that about how, what language do you use not to be alarmist and, mm-hmm. and not to create mm-hmm. fear and panic. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure I can answer that very well, because I have that same question. I think our tone and how we talk about it, yep. and our demeanor is a big part of it. Mm-hmm. I think that if we can focus on letting them know that we care and that we'll be there with them as they go through it, and that as we hear things, we'll also absolutely reach out and invite them in to come and talk. But outside of really helping them to feel our care and concern for them, mm-hmm. we do need to be careful not to say, well, you should be really concerned right now, or you're the group that perhaps should be the most fearful, or anything like that is never going to help these students.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think sort of avoiding the doomsday message, I think would be very helpful. And I think there was a question about, and I think Lily, you asked a question about the neutral language, and I think Marino actually posted what their president sent out, and I'd also be happy to send to NAFSA the letter that our Dean of Graduate School and myself, we sent out a letter to all the international students. I'll be happy to share that as well. And see if, feel free to use that.
So Jennifer Brumfield just put up a great question, mm-hmm. and also a resource as far as the planned programming to give students tools on how to handle situations of harassment. Mm-hmm. That, I think, is a great time to really branch out with your campus and your offices of equity and diversity and counseling centers. And I think this is where it needs to come from more than just the ISSS offices.
Yep.
It needs to be an entire institution that says, mm-hmm. we won't tolerate that, and mm-hmm. we will help fight against that. And so I would hope that there's a lot of programming that's mm-hmm. being prepared and planned for in case that happens on institutions.
And I would recommend that if you do have Title IX offices on your campus, most of the Title IX offices will have a bias reporting. Mainly through the website, and I think that is a great source. I think to inform the student, to make sure that they report it, and also we encourage them to come and talk to us as well.
Perfect. Aaron just put up a great resource too. It looks like from the Southern Poverty Law Center
mm-hmm. Yep.
about bigotry. Thank you, Aaron.
Yep. So there was a question on, has there been speculation on STEM OPT impact? Again, we don't know. David, is this something that you can talk about, or is this something, again, very speculative if we say anything?
Well, I think as you said before, avoiding speculation is we have to do that right now. Yeah. A firm understanding of how a benefit has been created can go far in addressing some concerns. For example, STEM OPT benefit was created by regulation through a long process, and to undo it, it would have to go through the regulatory process again.
Yeah. And there was I think Roger Atkins had and I think this is for IEM folks in terms of tips for admissions officers and recruiters who encounter reluctance, and so this is I think once again a great time to I think talk to your admission officers and sort of create a resource.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to also remember that the campaign rhetoric is often very different than the reality of a presidential administration. And certainly we hope that's the case in many, many ways, but that kind of is the precedent. And even some of the things that we've heard President-elect Trump now say seem to pivot or change a little bit. And so really that speculation can be dangerous if we have no idea really how he's going to respond in some ways, or as you mentioned, David, the process and the time it will take to get through there.
Mm-hmm. And I think Katie had a question about, are there experts discussing possible long-term impacts on the international education field? And I think this is an ongoing conversation, and because once the landscape becomes, I think, clear, and I would also like to point out, I think the joint statement put out by NAFSA and several other associations and presidents, I think earlier, just prior to the election, to both campaigns, stressing the importance of higher education, foreign policy. I think peace and justice, I think, comes into play, and I think public policy people within NAFSA, I think as policies unfold, I think they will actively speak out and for against any thing that goes against the values and interest in international education. So. I think it's just a question of, just trying to figure out, what will happen before we can actually take any action. And I think that is the most frustrating part in all of this.
Yeah. I also think what a better time than this week where we've been celebrating international education across the country to really help showcase the wonderful contributions that are made by our international students and scholars. And I think that will likely be an even more important thing moving forward, giving us an opportunity to talk about the wonderful, great enrichment that comes on our campuses because of these visitors who have come and who share with us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and then Martin Tillman had a comment about the fact that unfortunately, you can't really put this back in the bottle, once it's out there, and it's very true. But at the same time, I think it just now becomes a question of, how we continue to advocate and really, and really push for the changes, and really push for the values that I think we inherently believe in.
And again, I think that's where avoiding the speculation is most. Because we don't know, and I think Martin's very right that's not going to make a student feel better. Mm-hmm. But we need to be careful not to speculate on either side that will also either create more fear or give hope that we don't know what will happen yet.
Yeah. So Ravi and Sam, thank you so much for leading the discussion. You'll see on the next slide, some of you have asked questions about the nuts and bolts, if you will, of regulatory changes, impacts, things that we are advocating for, as Ravi and Sam have mentioned. And again, moving forward and having productive discussions is what I think NAFSAs are about, the sharing of the pieces. Coming up on December 1st at 2 p.m., we will host a virtual NAFSA government connection titled Regulatory Practice and a New Presidential Administration. This is also on the networks, and if you go to the Town Hall website, it will link you to this event as well for you to register. This government connection will feature 2 immigration law experts addressing questions about what the new presidential administration may hold for NAFSAs who advise students and scholars, and those who assist DACA students, and I know that's of interest to this audience today. Since it's impossible to know exactly how a new administration will affect our work, we'll discuss a range of possibilities, changes that seem more likely or less likely, and how changes to immigration law, regulation, and policy are made. To the extent possible, we'll answer the questions that are submitted in advance of the event and those submitted during the event. So again, for more information, please go to the www.nafsa.org/government connection webpage to register for it. So thank you, Ravi and Sam, again for leading the discussion. We were very thrilled to see the sharing of resources. Again, as a reminder, you can go to network.nafsa to upload any resources that you will want to share with the collective group. We will also continue to collect the resources that are being shared and post them on a resource page. And I want to thank everyone this afternoon for participating. Again, this recording will be made available this afternoon. Please check the www.nafsa.org/townhall for updates. And continue to send us questions which will help us formulate future virtual town hall events. Thank you.
Thank you.